I wasn't searching for secrets that afternoon. I was only looking for a bookmark. The living room was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hear the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock. Sunlight fell across the coffee table where her journals were stacked in neat rows, just as she always kept them. She had written in them faithfully, every evening after dinner, pen scratching softly as I dozed in my chair. I'd passed them hundreds of times without curiosity. But that day, something nudged me to open one. The cover was smooth leather, cracked gently at the edges, warm from the sun. As I flipped through the pages, the faint scent of lavender rose up. Her scent, so familiar it made my chest tighten. Then came the sound that changed everything. The delicate crinkle of an envelope sliding against paper. It was sealed, tucked deep inside, and dated 30 years earlier. 30 years. My breath caught as though the air had thickened around me. I didn't cry when I found it. I was past tears by then. But my fingers shook as if the truth inside already knew it was about to alter my life. For a long moment, I just stared at the handwriting on the front. It was hers, gentle, deliberate. And suddenly, I remember the first time I saw her write in these journals. After our daughter was born, her shoulders bent under the weight of exhaustion, but her hands steady with resolve. I remember the suitcase we carried into our first home, its handle worn but sturdy, just like her. Little flashes of our life together flickered, reminding me how much of her world had lived quietly between these pages. And now, a question I'll pass to you. What would you do if your partner hid a letter for decades? Would you open it without hesitation, or pause, afraid that what you discover might undo the story you believed all your life? Before I share what happened next, I need you to do something. If this is already stirring something inside you, don't just like it. Hit the hype button. It's YouTube's way of lifting voices like ours, seniors with untold stories. You can hype 3 videos a week, and each one makes sure these stories don't get buried. So hype, subscribe, and share, because what's inside that letter is not just a secret. It's a revelation that may change the way you see sacrifice, silence, and love. My name is Edrin Calloway, and I am 68 years old, a widowed husband now, but once a man who wore too many hats, provider, father, and sometimes ghost in my own home because work swallowed up so much of me. I was never rich, never famous. What I was steady. 2 jobs most years, 3 when times got lean. By day, I hammered nails and lifted beams. By night, I swept aisles or stocked shelves. My back knew the weight of lumber. My palms knew the sting of blisters. And my heart knew only one aim: to make sure my family had a life better than mine. We build our future one coin at a time. I can still hear the glass jar clinking on the counter, every drop of spare change ringing like a promise. That jar became the down payment for our first home, a weathered little place with chipped paint and steps that complained under your feet. It wasn't much, but to us it was a fortress. We vowed our children would never know the uncertainty we had known, and so we sacrificed, sometimes in ways that left us weary, but never broken. The world of our youth feels like a museum now. We spun rotary phones with cords that coiled like vines, holding our breath during long-distance calls because every second meant more dollars. We waited on letters instead of texts. Envelopes creased from their travels, sometimes perfumed faintly because she, my wife, Lena, always added that touch before sending them. Her handwriting danced across recipe cards, soft and careful, the same loops I would one day find in her journals. Evenings had their rhythm too. We'd sit by the radio long before televisions owned every living room. Songs filled the air, and she would hum along while stirring a pot on the stove, one arm balancing a child. The cards she wrote recipes on are still with me, stained by oil and flour, each dish carrying the taste of her devotion. I can almost hear her laugh when the bread didn't rise or the soup came out too thin. She never called it failure. She called it learning. But here's what I want you to know about Lena. She wasn't simply the woman who cooked, cleaned, or wrote letters. She was the quiet center of our family's strength. She was dignity dressed in cotton dresses, resilience tied in an apron. She was the one who made sure the children had new shoes while she wore hers until the soles thinned. She was the one who sat up mending torn clothes while I slept, never complaining. She bore the weight of 1,000 unseen sacrifices and never once asked for recognition. When I think of her now, she doesn't live in photographs. She lives in the texture of those recipe cards, in the smell of lavender she tucked in drawers, in the radio songs that still echo in my head. She wasn't a character in my life. She was the author of it, rewriting our story with love I never deserved, but was blessed to receive. And if you've ever loved someone who gave more than they ever asked for, you know exactly what I mean. As seniors, we carry these truths like secret lanterns, shining on the sacrifices we didn't always see while they were happening. I wonder, who was that person for you? Whose quiet dignity shaped your life in ways you're only now beginning to understand? The house we built our lives in was not grand, but it carried a kind of dignity that cannot be measured in square footage. It stood at the end of a quiet street where children's bicycles leaned against fences, and every neighbor knew the name of every dog, every grandchild, and every ache of old age. On summer evenings, you could hear the screen doors slamming shut one after another, like a chorus marking the end of the day. On Sundays, the bells of St. Andrew's Church rang clear across the neighborhood, calling everyone to gather, not just for worship, but for the kind of fellowship that made you feel you belonged. The front porch was our pride. Wooden boards smoothed by years of feet coming and going, by laughter spilling out during family gatherings, and by quiet evenings when Lena and I sat with mugs of tea, watching fireflies spark across the lawn. It wasn't just a porch. It was where news was shared, where worries were eased, and where promises were whispered in the cool dusk. The creak of those steps still echoes in my mind, carrying the weight of generations moving in and out of that home. Inside, the house bore the marks of living, not wealth. Wallpaper faded under sunlight, the kitchen floor scuffed by decades of children running in and out, and the faint smell of coffee that never left the walls. Yet each imperfection felt like a badge of honor. Every scratch on the dining table told the story of meals shared, homework done late at night, and bills sorted under candlelight when the power failed. It was the kind of house where life happened openly, honestly, without shame in its smallness. The community around us mirrored that spirit. Neighbors borrowed sugar and returned pies. Arguments might flare, but were always mended by the next Sunday supper. A man's word meant something back then. Mortgages weighed heavy. Interest rates climbed higher than our paychecks could stretch, but people still believed in trust. A handshake was as binding as a signature, and your reputation traveled faster than your car ever could. We didn't have apps to review our character. Our honesty was measured by how we treated the person across the fence. Generations before us taught us to carry burdens with pride, not complaint. You knew who had lost their job before they said a word, because their lights went out earlier and the grass grew a little longer. And so, you mowed your neighbor's lawn quietly, left groceries at their door, and rang the bell only once before walking away. It wasn't charity. It was survival dressed as kindness. That was how communities lived, together, interwoven like the quilts our mothers stitched out of old clothes. Looking back, I realize now that our house was more than timber and nails. It was a vessel of every laugh and every argument, of whispered dreams and bitter disappointments. It carried the sound of children learning to walk, the hush of prayers said in the dark, the slam of doors in teenage rebellion, and the sighs of forgiveness that always followed. Back then, houses weren't just shelters. They were the backdrop of every promise we ever made, and sometimes every promise we broke. For those of us who've lived long enough, we know the truth. A home is not its market value. It's the scent of morning coffee, the comfort of familiar creaks, and the stories etched into its walls. And perhaps that's why, when we're older, we linger longer in our living rooms, tracing the memories hidden in corners. Tell me, what do you remember most vividly about the home that raised you? Was it the sounds, the smells, the neighbors who became family, or the promises that house still whispers to you today? The moment I found the letter, time seemed to falter. I held it in my hands, the paper soft with age, edges curled like petals that had waited too long to be touched. The seal was still intact, unbroken, as though guarding a truth too heavy for daylight. Her handwriting was on the front, deliberate, looping, steady. It was the same script that had once filled birthday cards, grocery lists, recipe notes left on the counter. But here, on this envelope, The ink seemed pressed deeper, as though her hand had carried a weight when she wrote it, as if she knew it would be read long after her voice was gone. My breath came shallow, my chest tight, and I felt in that instant as though the life I had lived with her was colliding with another, hidden one I never knew existed. Discovery doesn't always bring relief. Sometimes it arrives like a shadow, whispering questions sharp enough to pierce through the years you thought were certain. I sat frozen, the envelope resting in my palm, heavier than any object its size should be. Why did she hide it? The question echoed louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. My mind, restless and unwilling to be calmed, darted into places I never thought I would wander. Could it be betrayal? A confession of love for another man? Or something darker, something she had never been able to bring herself to tell me? Every silence we had shared, every night she had closed her journal quickly when I walked past. Suddenly those memories looked different in the harsh light of suspicion. Guilt gnawed at me, twisting my stomach. I wanted to rip the envelope open, to end the torment of not knowing. But my hand would not obey, because once opened, the truth could never be undone. Suspicion feeds on silence, multiplies in the spaces between memories, and convinces you of stories you never believed you were capable of imagining. And yet, as the darkness of suspicion pulled at me, another voice rose quietly inside. I could not erase the woman I had known for decades. I remember the hospital nights when pneumonia nearly took me from this world. She sat by my bed, her hand cool against my fevered forehead, reading aloud until I drifted into uneasy sleep. I remember the lean years when bills piled higher than paychecks, and she found ways to stretch meals from scraps without letting the children feel deprived. I remember the accident that almost ruined us, when the insurance company threatened to swallow us whole, and she walked into the banker's office with a steady back and a calm voice, convincing him to give us another chance. These were not the acts of a woman who betrayed. These were the acts of someone who carried burdens far greater than she let on, someone who made sure her family never fell apart, even when the ground beneath her was shaking. Trust, I realized, is not built in grand declarations. It is stitched together in 1,000 small acts, repeated until they become invisible, until you can no longer separate them from the rhythm of your life. She had stitched my life together in this way, and still, doubt clung to me like smoke that lingers long after a fire is put out. Suspicion and trust wrestled inside me, one moment tipping toward fear, the next toward faith. Each heartbeat was a tug-of-war between believing in her and fearing what the letter might reveal. For a fleeting moment, I thought about turning to our children. Perhaps they knew something I didn't. Perhaps they had seen her with a journal, had caught glimpses of truths I had overlooked. I even imagined sending a picture of the envelope to our eldest daughter, just to watch her reaction. But then another thought struck me like a warning. What if the truth in this envelope didn't belong to them? What if it was meant only for me and her? A secret seal between husband and wife. What if opening it in their presence not only shattered me, but destroyed their memory of their mother? That possibility felt unbearable. So I hesitated. That night, I sought distraction online, scrolling aimlessly until my eyes landed on stories of people who, like me, had stumbled upon secrets left behind by those they loved. I read about men who discovered diaries filled with confessions of old heartbreaks, women who found letters hidden in closets, revealing debts or illnesses never spoken of. Some stories were tales of betrayal, but others were of sacrifice, truths carried alone so that loved ones would never have to bear their weight. One man wrote that his wife had hidden her struggles with loans, quietly paying them down so he would not despair. Another discovered letters to her children, written in the quiet hours, filled with love she never dared to voice aloud. It struck me deeply. Secrets aren't always lies. Sometimes they are shields. And yet, the question would not leave me. Why 30 years? Why tuck it away in silence, never to be spoken of, never to be found until now? My fingers traced the seal as my pulse pounded in my ears. Every part of me wanted to know, and every part of me feared the knowing, because opening it would mean risking the fragile peace I had built in her absence. Conflict does not always roar. Sometimes it is a whisper, a war fought quietly in the mind, between suspicion and trust, between fear and hope, between the life you believed you lived and the truth you may never want to uncover. That is where I found myself. An old man, widowed and weary, holding a letter that could rewrite the story of my life, yet too afraid to tear the paper and let the words spill out. And so I pass the question to you. If you held in your hand a secret that had waited for decades, would you open it, no matter what truth it carried? Or would you leave it sealed, choosing instead to protect the story you already knew and loved? When I think back on the life we lived, the letter in my hand feels less like a revelation and more like a thread connecting moments I never fully understood until now. It's strange how memory works, how one image can bleed into another, how flashbacks rise uninvited, each carrying its own truth. I remember the nights when our daughter was young, her school projects sprawling across the kitchen table like miniature worlds. Cardboard, glue, paints, and paper scattered under the dim light of a single lamp. Our girl would fall asleep with her cheek pressed against the table, a marker still in her hand. And there was Lena, tired from an entire day of work and house chores, eyes heavy but determination unwavering. She stayed up long after the rest of us were asleep, cutting, gluing, correcting tiny mistakes so that in the morning, our daughter would wake to a project polished enough to shine. The teachers never knew, our daughter never realized, but I saw. And yet, I let her carry it, thinking it was just a mother's way. Looking back, I realized it was one of countless burdens she shouldered quietly, making sure her child's world looked brighter than her own fatigue. Another memory pushes forward, softer but sharper in its truth. Times were hard one winter, bills stacking in ways that frightened even me. I was too proud to admit we might drown. And then, as if by miracle, a bill was paid, the lights stayed on, and the children never knew how close the darkness came. Only years later, when I stumbled across her old jewelry box, did I realize the necklace her mother gave her was gone. She had pawned it, never telling a soul. She bore the loss silently, smiled as though nothing had changed, and kept our household afloat with a sacrifice no one asked for, but all of us benefited from. That was her way, protecting us not with grand speeches, but with quiet acts of surrender. There was also the night of the accident, a memory that comes back in fragments because of the fear that clouded everything. We had been driving home late when a truck swerved, nearly ending us both. The car spun, metal screeched, and in those breathless moments I thought the end had come. When the dust settled and the world went silent, she reached for me with trembling hands and whispered something I didn't understand at the time. "I can't let you see it." Her voice cracked, her eyes heavy with something deeper than fear of the crash. I brushed it aside then, convincing myself it was shock. But holding this letter now, I hear those words differently. I wonder if she was already carrying the secret sealed inside that envelope. She used to call it her burden. I see now it was her shield. Every hidden act, every silence, was less about deception and more about protection. She believed she was sparing me, sparing us, from truth she thought would break me. Maybe she underestimated me, or maybe she overestimated the power of truth to wound. Either way, her choice wasn't cruelty. It was love, delivered in a language I failed to recognize at the time. What strikes me most now, as an old man sifting through decades of memory, is how many of us live with people whose sacrifices we only discover too late. We move through life assuming love is shown in visible gestures, anniversaries, kind words, shared laughter. But sometimes love hides in the unseen, in a mother's late-night work on a project, in a necklace quietly surrendered, in a whispered phrase during a near-death moment. So I ask you, what hidden acts of love have shaped your life? Who carried burdens you didn't notice, or couldn't appreciate at the time? And what will you do now to acknowledge those sacrifices before it's too late? I sat with the letter for what felt like a lifetime, but when I finally broke the seal, there was no going back. The flap tore with a soft rip, and the paper slid free, thin, yellowed, trembling slightly in my hands, though the shaking was not from age alone. Her handwriting stretched across the page, graceful but heavy, as if every word had been pressed down with the weight of a secret she prayed I would never have to read. She began with an apology, not for wrongdoing, but for silence. She wrote that she had once carried a debt so large it could have swallowed her home whole. Notices arrived, lawyers circled, the bank threatened foreclosure. And all the while, I had been working double shifts, unaware that the life we clung to was one signature away from slipping through our fingers. She went alone to the hearings, stood before judges with her voice steady, even as fear gnawed at her. She signed her name over and over again, not to free herself, but to protect us. As I read, a memory returned like lightning. The day she came home pale and quiet, claiming she had been just at the courthouse for some papers. I hadn't pressed her then. I thought it was a trivial matter. But now, with her words before me, I realized the truth. She had walked into that courtroom not for herself, but for us. She bore the humiliation, the judgment, the fear, and told no one. She didn't want me to feel smaller than I already did as a man stretched thin by work and responsibility. Line after line revealed her sacrifices. The necklace her mother had given her, sold to cover a bill. Nights she stayed awake, praying for extensions, bartering with creditors, keeping the children's laughter safe while she carried despair like a hidden stone. She wrote, "I wanted you to be strong for the family, so I carried what would have broken you. Please forgive the silence. It was my way of loving you." The room around me vanished. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the trees outside. None of it mattered. All I could hear was the echo of her voice in those words, the truth pouring out long after she was gone. It was not betrayal I held in my hands, but devotion so fierce it left me breathless. For years, I had feared what secrets might do to a marriage. But here, in this fragile paper, I found a love greater than I had understood. She had chosen silence, not because she didn't trust me, but because she wanted to shield me. Her quiet was not distance, it was armor. And in that moment, my heart broke not from anger, but from awe. The house felt unfamiliar after I read her letter, as though the walls themselves knew truths I had only just discovered. It wasn't emptiness I felt, nor the cold loneliness that grief had once carved into me. It was something different, an awareness, a reverence, almost as if her presence lingered more strongly now that I finally understood the weight she had carried in silence. The next morning, I reached for the cupboard as I had done countless times before, and my hand settled on her favorite cup. It was a simple porcelain mug, nothing fancy, chipped along the rim from years of use. She always insisted it was still good, even when I teased her to let me buy her a new one. That cup, once overlooked, felt like a relic now. As I poured tea and wrapped my hand around it, I realized it wasn't just a vessel. It was a mirror of her life. Worn, imperfect, maybe even fragile in places, yet still serving faithfully, quietly, without complaint. With every sip, I thought about how much she had given, how often she had chosen to absorb the crack instead of letting it break someone else. Later that afternoon, I sat outside on the porch as the grandchildren played in the driveway with sticks of chalk. Their laughter rang out, free and bright, filling the air with the kind of joy she had always fought to protect. I watched their little hands scrawl crooked houses, uneven suns, and lopsided hearts across the gray cement. Then the youngest turned to me with chalk-stained fingers and asked if I wanted to draw too. I knelt carefully, my knees stiff with age, and sketched a heart beside theirs. In that moment, the tears came, not out of sadness but out of gratitude. They would never know how close their grandmother had come to losing all of this for them, how fiercely she had guarded their chance at innocence. That was her victory, even if it cost her silence. When evening came, I returned to the bedroom. The journal still lay open where I had left it, the letter folded on the table. I read it once more, not to uncover anything new, but to let the words settle deeper into me. Then I folded the paper gently, along the creases she had made all those years ago, and slid it back into its resting place inside the journal. I placed it on the bedside table, where her lamp still stood, where her hand used to rest each night as she turned the light off. It no longer felt like a secret hidden away. It felt like a story returned to its home. As I sat in the quiet glow of the lamp, a thought pressed into my chest. The truth came too late for me to thank her, but maybe not too late for me to honor her. I couldn't undo the years she spent bearing burdens in silence, but I could live differently now. I could tell her story. I could teach my children and grandchildren that love sometimes wears the face of sacrifice, that silence is not always neglect, but sometimes the loudest form of devotion. And so I leave you with this question. What truths in your own life arrived too late for thanks, but not too late for honor? Who carried more than they ever admitted, so that you could walk lighter? Their sacrifices may never have been spoken aloud, but you can still honor them with your gratitude, with your choices, and with the way you live the rest of your days. Because gratitude delayed is not gratitude denied. It is still yours to give, if you choose to give it. When we reach the later years of our lives, we begin to see truths differently. They're no longer black and white, no longer confined to simple ideas of right and wrong. Instead, they arrive layered, complicated, and often softened by time. The letter I found taught me that silence, which I once mistook for distance, was in fact another language of love. She did not keep quiet to deceive me. She kept quiet to shield me. And perhaps that is the first truth we all must carry forward. Silence sometimes carries love, not deceit. If you've ever judged someone's quietness as coldness, look again. Beneath that silence might be the deepest act of devotion. The second truth is one we all discover too late. Sacrifices are often invisible until years later. We notice the big gestures, the gifts, the anniversaries, the celebrations. But the real shaping of our lives comes from smaller, hidden acts. A necklace pawned in secret to keep food on the table. A mother staying up late to finish her child's project so they could walk into class proud. A father who worked long hours and never said how tired he was because he wanted his children to see him strong. Those sacrifices do not always announce themselves in the moment, but years later they rise like old photographs you forgot you had, reminding you who truly built the foundation beneath your feet. The third truth is harder, but necessary. Dignity can survive secrets. We often believe that if someone hides something from us, their dignity or our trust is lost. But there is a different perspective. Sometimes what we call secrets are simply burdens carried privately, choices made to protect rather than to harm. To honor dignity is to recognize the intention, not just the act. Her decision to carry those debts, to endure those hearings, was not a betrayal of me. It was her way of preserving our life together. Dignity is not about full transparency. It is about the spirit behind the choice. And finally, some truths are gifts, even if they arrive late. The letter came too late for me to hold her hand and say thank you. Too late for me to share the burden she carried. But it did not arrive too late for me to honor her, to teach my children and grandchildren about her courage, to live the rest of my days in gratitude rather than in doubt. Not every truth needs to come in the moment. Some truths are designed to be discovered when our hearts are ready, when the years have softened us enough to truly understand. So I ask you, have you ever discovered something about a loved one after they were gone? Maybe an old photograph, a letter, a story told by someone else that made you see them differently. And what about your own life? What truth waits quietly in you? A truth you haven't spoken aloud, but hope will one day be understood. These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Because life after 60 is not just about survival. It is about reflection, about choosing to honor those silent sacrifices, and about deciding which truths we will finally let speak before our time runs out. This is Life After 60 Stories. If this story touched you, if it stirred a memory of someone you loved, or reminded you of sacrifices once hidden, don't just click like. Show your support in a way that matters. Hit that new hype button. Every hype tells YouTube that seniors' voices deserve to be heard, that our stories are not only worth telling, but worth amplifying. You can hype 3 videos a week, and each one helps bring these truths to more people who need them. Share this with a friend or family member who may be carrying their own quiet story, who needs to be reminded that love often hides in silence, but never loses its power. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because after 60, our stories don't fade in the background. They finally get told, fully, honestly, and with the dignity they deserve.